Hey everyone, it's the Duke, and in today's video we're going to be talking about Final Fantasy XIII. As a gamer, I frequently get asked what are my favorite games. Final Fantasy X has always been one of those games that I bring up when I'm talking about my favorite games. But recently, I've been wanting to replay Final Fantasy XIII. Final Fantasy XIII is probably the most polarizing game in the Final Fantasy series for a number of reasons. People are very divided about the game with how they feel about it, especially when ranking it in regards to the other Final Fantasy games. So in this vlog, I wanted to kind of explore why this game is so polarizing, and also maybe talk a little bit about my thoughts and feelings about why I actually do like this game, despite some of the more divisive things about it. When Final Fantasy XIII launched, it had really amazing graphics for the time, especially on the PlayStation 3. It was unlike any game I had ever seen. I would have given it the title of greatest looking game of right now. So that was something that initially drew me towards Final Fantasy XIII. I mean, I saw the cutscenes, I saw the battle system, and it all just looked like so fluid and so different than what we had seen in previous games like Final Fantasy XII. So I was pretty interested in playing it, and I bought it. Final Fantasy XIII ended up being less than my favorite game. That's a way we'll go about in saying it. And like others, I found things about it that I just didn't like, especially when I compare it to Final Fantasy X, which is my favorite Final Fantasy game. So, among the many things that people don't like about it, I think the chief complaint about the game is that it's just too linear. And I can completely understand this complaint entirely. Final Fantasy XIII is extremely linear up until Chapter 11 of 13. That's right. Out of 13 chapters, the game is linear for about 80% of it, and even then it continues to be linear. In fact, it's not until about Chapter 9 that you're actually able to choose your party, as in, of your 6 playable characters, who is in your battle party. So just over the halfway point, you finally get to choose your parties. That's a little bit too linear, and I can understand why people feel that way. But I also don't feel that linearity is necessarily such a bad thing for video games. Final Fantasy X, after all, is extremely linear and up until you get the airship and then can start traveling around the world. And you don't get the airship till about the 2/3 point of the game. So Final Fantasy X was pretty linear. I mean, and when I think about Final Fantasy X, especially when compared to other Final Fantasy games, like Final Fantasy VIII, for example, where it was linear in terms of the story, but once you got to the open world, you could do whatever you wanted. I got extremely lost in Final Fantasy VIII. Now, admittedly, I wasn't completely paying attention to what was going on in the story or where I needed to be going next, but once I got to the open world map, I just wandered around aimlessly for about an hour and couldn't figure out what to do until I ran into an area with monsters that were just way above me and I got wrecked. I never went back to Final Fantasy VIII. Now again, I understand it's more of a personal issue, but that's one area that I feel like where linearity is not necessarily the worst sin that a game could commit. I feel like linearity is actually really good for certain games, especially Final Fantasy games, and games that are actually complex, such as Final Fantasy XIII. The linearity is done for storytelling reasons. You need to understand these characters, what their motivations are, what drives them, what is holding them back personality-wise, and things like that. And the linearity also teaches you how to play the game. So, despite how people feel that it is linear, I don't necessarily feel like it's the worst thing for Final Fantasy XIII. I just talked about how the story teaches you about the characters. Well, another point that I've heard people make about why they don't like 13 is because they think the characters are annoying. And, well, yes, they can be extremely annoying, but they definitely grow on you over time, or at least they did for me, especially as you get to know them and their backstories. It's very important to understand why Snow is the way he is, why he just seems like he's extremely overconfident, maybe even, showboating at times. It's part of, his overall personality, and just that he wants to protect Sarah and the people that he cares about and loves. You eventually learn why Lightning is just so cold. You learn about why, Vanille feels like she just has this giant secret or chip on her shoulder that she's trying to, hide from everyone. All of these stories are extremely important to learn, and it helps you learn more about the characters and understand especially when you get to their Eidolon battles later in the game, why their Eidolons appear, and in what circumstances make them appear. Now, Eidolon battles take us into the next topic, which is the battle system. Now, the auto battle system I've always really liked, especially in the way that it's deployed in 13, but I could also understand why people don't. In previous Final Fantasy games, you had complete control over what your characters were going to do at any given point in time. If you wanted them to attack on this turn, you could. If you wanted them to heal, you could. If you wanted them to cast haste or protect, those were all things that you did. Whereas in Final Fantasy 13, the game's AI manages those moment-to-moment decision-making. Some people don't like that because it's much more hands-off, but I feel like it works in Final Fantasy 13 because you still have total control over the roles that your people are playing at any given point in time and what roles your team is doing, which is kind of nice because these battles happen in real time. Some people prefer the turn-based systems that you found in previous Final Fantasy games like 10 and 1 and 2. Some people prefer the active time system that you found in 7 and in 8. For me, I like this because it kind of strikes a balance between the passive gameplay in that you don't really have to micromanage each individual moment, but it also gives you a little bit of the active time battle system that you found in previous Final Fantasy games. The moment-to-moment decision-making that you're going to do is going to rely on your party's roles, or their paradigms as they're called, which is the collection of roles that they're playing. There's a lot of nuance and complexity in this battle system that I feel like you don't really see that nuance and complexity until you get to eventually having 3 party members much later in the game. Most of the game you're shackled with just 2 party members, and that's not the most interesting battle system. And that's also going to lead me into another topic about why the game might be considered boring at times, but we'll get there. So with the battle system having 3 people, you have a lot more flexibility in what you can do in handling battles. And as you advance later into the game, some of these battles are just super long. The first Barthandelus fight, which you can see right here, is an extremely long fight. And if you don't understand the paradigm system, and more importantly, when to switch between paradigms based on what's happening in the given moment, you're not going to be able to beat these boss battles. They're extremely long and they require precise decision making and a thorough understanding of the paradigm system. So while some people don't like that you can't just choose when to attack, which by the way you can go to abilities and then just have them, you can manually pick what they're going to do at any given moment, but most of the time the game's AI is pretty good at figuring that out. So I feel like the battle system is really not detrimental to the game, and I really like the paradigm system. It's probably the most redeeming thing about Final Fantasy 13 for me because it's just so interesting. There are times where I would switch between paradigms probably every 30 seconds or every minute just to fully maximize a stagger gauge or to quickly get some buffs or some healing before a big attack is coming. That kind of gameplay I feel is really only possible because of the complex battle system that seems like it's boring. So in short, I like the battle system. It's a lot more complex than people think, and a mastery of it is the only way you're going to get further into the game. Now, on the topic of boredom, this is a completely valid complaint, and I fully still believe that there are parts of the game that are just very extremely boring. The first 8 chapters or so, you're pretty much with just 2 party members at a given time. Now, 2 party members is fine to deal with like most of the battles. They're really not that hard, but it's not super interesting. The 2-person paradigm system is just not a lot of fun. And I also feel like there are certain story segments that are much more boring than the others, particularly anything with Sazh and Vanille. Mostly because, and I get that it's part of their character, they're just, running from the conflict. They're just trying to distract themselves from the responsibility that they have. But it doesn't make it interesting, so I can completely understand why some parts of the game are completely boring. But once you get to Chapter 10, which is where you can fully utilize the 3-party system where your Crystarium expands and you can start leveling up other roles, and you can also gain access in a minor way to the other roles that aren't core to your character, that's when I feel the game gets its most interesting. But admittedly, that's 70% of the way through the game, and in my playthrough, that came in at about the 20-hour mark. So I can understand why some people didn't make it there because they got super bored within the first 10 hours. But if you can hold on to that 20-hour mark, the game gets amazingly fun. Now, some other thoughts that I have are that while it was a gorgeous game in, 2011 when it came out, or 2010, in today, it's not the best looking game. I recorded all this footage at 1440p, and there have definitely been at times where I've noticed pixelation, but admittedly, I could have played at 1080p. I'm sure there's mods out there that upscale the textures to 1440p, but on native 1440p with no mods, the game doesn't look as good. The cutscenes, however, still look amazing, if also hard to watch because they just happen so quickly. It's almost like watching a Transformers movie, but with, more anime. Like other Final Fantasy games, this game has amazing music. Everything from the battle theme to the individual character themes to the music that plays during Bartandalos' fight. It's all amazing. In fact, here some of it is now.
Bring it on!
Okay, wrapping up my thoughts on this game, I still really like this game. I can also completely understand why people don't like this game or never want to play this game. However, it is a very unique entry in the Final Fantasy series, and I do feel that it's probably maybe the most unique game other than 15 to come out of Final Fantasy. But admittedly, I haven't played some of the other titles, like I haven't played 6, for example. So I think 13 is great, and it's different, and it also has a lot of issues, but it hasn't changed my enjoyment of the game. This has been my 5th playthrough of the game since I bought it back in 2010, so obviously I kind of like the game, even though each of those playthroughs can take 30, 40 plus hours, but it is a good playthrough. If you're interested in checking out, it is available on Steam, on, of course, PC. You can also find it on, I think, GOG as well, and maybe other game stores. And if you have an older system, such as a PlayStation 3, or you have an Xbox with any generation of Xbox 360 and up, you can play it through backwards compatibility. So check out Final Fantasy XIII if you're interested in trying something different. If you liked this video or anything that you've seen so far, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you're interested in staying connected with me, my Twitch and Discord links are below. Thanks for watching, guys.